The lantern glass was still warm when my father set it down on the kitchen table. It was 3 mornings before my wedding, a little after 5, and the house had that cold blue look it gets before the stove has taken hold. My mother was in the back room folding towels. My boots were by the door with dried mud on the heels. I remember the scrape of my father's chair more than I remember his first words. He pulled it out slow, like the floor itself was asking him not to speak. Then he looked at me across that table and said there was something I had to know before I stood in front of the church and promised my life to a woman. He did not say it with anger. That would have been easier. Anger gives a young man something to push against. My father said it plain, with both hands wrapped around his coffee cup and his eyes not quite meeting mine. And by the time the wedding day came, I had already made one decision that would follow my wife into our marriage, though she had not done one wrong thing to deserve it. My name is Jonas. I am a husband, a father, and the head of a household in an old order Amish community. I share these stories because there are things outsiders imagine about our life, and then there are the things a man carries quietly after the barn is swept and the children are asleep. If this story makes you think about what a husband owes his wife before he asks anything from her, I hope you will stay with me. And I would like to hear in the comments whether you believe a secret kept for protection can still do harm. I was 22 when I married. That seems young to some people now, but in our world it was not unusual. I had been working steady for years by then. I could handle a team. I could sharpen a plow point, patch harness leather, help raise a frame, and bring home money from carpentry work when the farm did not need me. I had a small house waiting, not far from my father's place, with 2 bedrooms and a lean-to shed. My wife, Miriam, was 19. She was quiet in a way that made some people mistake her for weak. She was not weak. She had a steady mind and a clean laugh, and when she listened to someone, she listened with her whole face. I noticed that she remembered small things. If an old woman said her knee was troubling her, Miriam asked after it the next Sunday. If a child dropped a mitten, she found the owner before anyone else saw it. She was the kind of woman who made a room feel less hard just by being in it. Our courtship was proper. We spoke with family nearby. We rode home from sings with others around us. I knew I wanted to marry her because peace followed her. A man notices that when he has spent enough time around noise. The wedding was set for late November. The fields were bare by then, and the air smelled of leaves gone wet and cold. Women from both families were already planning the food. My sisters were sewing. Her brothers were helping move boards and benches. There were lists on the table every time I came in from work. How many loaves, how many pies, which cousins would stay where, which neighbor had extra chairs. A wedding is not one day among us. It is a whole community putting its shoulder under a family. 3 mornings before the wedding, my father told me he needed help in the barn before breakfast. I thought a heifer had gotten loose or a hinge had broken, but when I came in from the cold, he was already sitting at the kitchen table. He had not lit the second lamp. That should have told me something. My father was a practical man. He did not sit in half darkness unless his mind was somewhere heavy. He waited until I sat down. Then he said, "There is something about Miriam's family that was told to me when you were small." I remember feeling my stomach tighten before I knew why. In our communities, family history matters, not in a proud way, or it should not be proud, but we know who carries debt badly. We know who has a temper. We know which families have sickness that comes down through blood. We know who keeps peace and who stirs trouble. A young man might think he is marrying only a woman. An older man knows he is also joining stories that began before him. My father told me that years earlier, before Miriam was born, her father had been involved in a serious dispute over money. Not a small misunderstanding over a harness or a day's wage. It had been a matter that nearly brought church discipline. There had been accusations that he had held back payment owed to another man after a business arrangement failed. No police, no court. That was not our way. But there had been meetings, hard ones. Men sitting late into the night with Bibles on the table and faces gone gray from tiredness. My father said the matter had been settled. Miriam's father had made things right as far as the church required. He had confessed stubbornness. He had repaid what the ministers judged was owed. After that, no one was to speak of it as gossip. That is why I had never heard it. But then my father leaned back and rubbed his thumb along the edge of the cup. He said, "A thing can be settled and still leave a mark." I was young enough to hear warning where he meant caution. I was young enough to think knowledge made me wise. I asked him if he believed Miriam's father was dishonest. My father shook his head. He said he believed the man had been proud, cornered, and slow to bend. Then he said something I did not understand until years later. "Do not make the daughter answer for the father's sin." That was the line, one sentence, plain as a fence post, and I told myself I understood it, but I did not. The wedding came with low clouds and a wind that rattled the loose pane in the washroom window. Miriam stood there in her wedding dress, calm as morning. When we made our promises, my voice did not shake. Hers did not either. We ate with family packed close at long tables. There were plates of chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy, pickles, bread, pies, coffee poured again and again. The house was warm from all the bodies in it. The windows fogged at the edges. Everyone said it was a good day. I smiled, I thanked people, I shook hands. I watched my wife move through the room with that gentle steadiness of hers, and behind it all, my father's warning sat in me like a stone in a boot. At first, I did not see what I was doing. That is the danger with a secret. You think because it is quiet, it is not active. But it works under the floorboards. When Miriam suggested we buy a better milk cow from her cousin, I questioned the price too sharply. When her father offered to lend me a set of tools for a job, I refused before I had reason to refuse. When she said her brothers might help with the spring fencing, I said I would rather hire from outside. She would look at me then, not angry, just puzzled. A woman knows when her husband is closing doors, even if he keeps his voice soft. Our first winter was not bad, but it was not as tender as it should have been. We were polite, we worked, we prayed, we learned each other's habits. She learned that I liked my coffee stronger than her father did. I learned that she hummed when she kneaded bread, but stopped if she knew I was listening. At night, when the house settled and the stove clicked as it cooled, there were moments when I could have told her. I could have said, "Miriam, my father told me something before our wedding, and I have let it stand between us." But I did not. A man can be ashamed and still stubborn. That is a hard truth. By spring, the cost of my silence had begun to show. Her parents came for supper one Sunday. Her mother brought apple butter and a basket of rolls. Her father helped me look at a loose brace in the shed, and he offered a simple suggestion for fixing it. I heard advice, but inside me it sounded like control. I said I had it handled. Too quick, too cold. Miriam heard it. I saw her shoulders draw in. That evening, after they had gone and the dishes were washed, she stood by the kitchen window with the drying cloth in her hands. Outside, the last light was lying flat across the yard. She did not turn around when she spoke. "Have I brought shame into your house?" That question did more to me than any accusation could have done. If she had shouted, I might have defended myself. If she had wept loudly, I might have thought first of calming her instead of hearing her. But she asked it quietly, like a person who had been gathering small hurts and finally had to name the shape of them. I said no, too fast. She turned then. Her eyes were wet, but her face was steady. She asked why I kept her family at arm's length. She asked why I stiffened when her father spoke. She asked what she had done, and there it was, the price of what I had kept. Not that she had done wrong, not that her father had even done wrong in the present. The price was that my wife had started searching herself for a fault I had planted there. I told her the truth that night, not well at first. Men like to think truth is clean because it is truth. It is not always clean when it has been delayed. It came out of me in pieces. My father, the old dispute, the warning, my fear that pride or bad dealing might still be in the family, my foolishness in watching her people as if I were a judge placed over them. She listened without moving. When I finished, the room felt too small for both of us. Then she said, "You married me, but you kept trial over me." I had no answer to that. There was none. The days after were quiet in a different way. Not peaceful quiet, repair quiet. I apologized, but apology is only the gate. You still have to walk the lane after it. I went to her father the next week. I did not repeat the old matter to make him relive shame. I simply told him I had judged his household wrongly in my heart, and that my manner toward him had not been right. He looked at me a long time. Then he said, "A young husband learns which burdens are his and which are not." He did not make it easy on me, and I do not blame him. Forgiveness is not the same as pretending nothing happened. With Miriam, it took longer. Trust often leaves by the door and comes back through the field, slow and muddy. I had to stop acting as if suspicion was wisdom. I had to let her family help when help was freely given. I had to ask questions without accusation tucked under them. I had to learn that being head of a household did not mean standing above everyone with a measuring rod. It meant standing first in line to repent when my pride wounded the people under my care. That first year taught me more about marriage than the wedding day did. A wedding shows what a man promises in public. The first year shows what he believes in private. I believed I was protecting my house. What I was really protecting was my own fear, and fear is a poor foundation. It makes a man careful in all the wrong ways. My father had not sinned by telling me. I have thought about that many times. He was trying to give me knowledge so I would not be blind, but he also gave me the answer with the warning. Do not make the daughter answer for the father's sin. The failure was mine because I carried the warning and dropped the mercy. Years passed. Miriam and I built a life. Children came, bills came, bad weather came, good harvest came too. Her father became a man I respected, not because I forgot what I had been told, but because I learned to see the whole of him. A man is not only the worst dispute he ever stood in. A family is not only the hardest chapter spoken about in whispers, and a wife is not a ledger where her husband's fears get written down. I will tell you something I know now that I did not know as a young groom. Secrets do not stay where you put them. You may hide a thing in your own chest, thinking you have spared another person, but it will come out in your tone, in your refusals, in the way you reach for control when trust was required. The person you are trying not to hurt may still feel the bruise. They just will not know where it came from. If I could go back to that cold morning before my wedding, I would still listen to my father. A man should hear wisdom from those who walked before him. But I would listen to the whole sentence, not just the fearful part. I would take Miriam aside before we married, with respect and care, and tell her what had been placed in my hands. Not to accuse her, not to shame her father, but because a husband and wife should not begin with one of them carrying a hidden court in his heart. What my wife paid was not money. It was not public shame. It was the quiet cost of being doubted by the man who had promised to cherish her. That is a heavy thing for a woman to carry, especially when she does not know why it has been placed on her shoulders. The Lord was merciful to us. We repaired what I had cracked, but I do not speak of it lightly. Some cracks close and still leave a line. I can see that line when I remember her standing at the kitchen window with the drying cloth in her hands, asking if she had brought shame into my house. She had not. I had brought fear into ours, and I had to learn slowly and honestly that a husband's strength is not proven by how closely he guards against old sins in other people. It is proven by how quickly he confesses the sin growing in himself. So if there is something you are carrying into your marriage, your home, or your dealings with another family, ask yourself whether it is wisdom or whether it is fear wearing wisdom's coat. The difference matters. Wisdom protects without punishing the innocent. Fear punishes first and calls it protection later. If this story spoke to you, I hope you will subscribe and walk with me through more stories from Amish life, told plainly from a husband's side of the table. And I would like to know your answer to this. When does keeping a painful truth quiet become its own kind of harm?